what's going on. Thank you so much for coming. Again, my name is Sue. I am a program assistant at the Elmhurst Public Library. And this afternoon during our program, if you do have any questions, at the bottom of your screen in the menu, in the Zoom menu, there is a Q&A section. That is where you can go ahead and put questions. So as we're going along and you don't want to forget, go ahead and type in your question there, and then we will, Tracey will answer them at the end of the program. And so go ahead, and doesn't matter how many questions you have, just keep putting them in there, and we will make sure to address them at the end. About halfway through, I'm also going to launch our poll. The poll has some questions about how many people are watching on your screen, and also like where you heard about the program. So if you would take a moment and just fill that out, we would really appreciate it. And I think that's it. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you, Tracey.
Thank you, Sue. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining me today. So this is a webinar, meaning Sue explained the Q&A. So you're going to get stuck listening to me first, and you guys are going to be muted. And then at the end is when we'll kind of go through the Q&A. So I just want to make sure you guys, it's a little bit different than a normal Zoom program. And then Sue is here as my emotional support person, because honestly, sometimes technology can be a little overwhelming for me, but we're going to get through this together. So addiction, choice or disease, that is what we are going to talk about today. So to introduce myself, my name is Tracey Orrick. I am the social services specialist here at the Elmhurst Public Library. I have my bachelor's in social work. I also have my CADC, which means I am a certified alcohol and drug counselor. I've been at the library for just over 2 years. I actually interned here for about a year as a social work for my social work program, and they saw the need here in the community, and so now here I am. I'm still here. For some of you that were not aware possibly that I was here in the library or what a social worker in a library does, feel free to Google social worker in a library. You'll see it is a growing trend. A lot of libraries are employing social workers to assist patrons with things that, you know, librarians really don't have the training or the time or maybe even the interest to help with. So prior to coming here, like I said, I was a CADC. I worked in Joliet in a treatment facility there in the outpatient department. And then I also worked on the west side of Chicago as a substance abuse counselor for people living with HIV. Addictions was my first choice of a field I wanted to go into. It's something that's always interested me. And then I went for the social work degree, basically so I could serve a broader population. So addictions is kind of like always my my go-to. I love the field of addictions. You know, I would love if I wasn't needed anymore, but that's not the way it is. But to me, it's a very interesting topic. So hopefully I can share some of this with you. So some of you, for whatever reason you're here, it could be that addiction has touched your life. Maybe it hasn't, maybe you're just curious. But addiction is something that really, for most people, it's touched some part of their life. There's a family member or a friend or even maybe self that addiction has touched. And that's what kind of brings people to these types of programs to learn a little bit more about it. And that's where my passion comes from, because I want people to understand it. All right, let's get going. For many, many years, addiction was seen as a moral failing. So a moral failing is, simply put, it's doing the wrong thing when you know better. So we know it's wrong to punch somebody in the face. But if we go ahead and punch that person in the face, that would be a moral failing. And we didn't care about it. We just started punching everybody. Okay, so for many, many years, addiction was believed to be a moral failing. Why don't they just stop? No willpower, weak of spirit. They should know better. Why would they choose this? You know, I'm sure we've heard some of those phrases before. So for many, many years, it was thought of as a moral failing. That has changed over the years. We don't see it as a moral failing anymore. And that's kind of what we're going to talk about today, is that difference between that moral failing and the recognition of it as a disease. Now, as a disclaimer for this presentation, When I refer to all substances, I'm referring to all substances. This is something a lot of people don't know, but alcohol is a substance. Nicotine is a substance. Chocolate is even a substance. But so this is all substances that I'm referring to. I'm not going to focus on one specific substance because that would be many, many different presentations, and we'd be here all afternoon, and we probably all have a little bit more to do today. But this is going to talk about all substances, but please keep in mind, a lot of people, even in the title of the CADC, it's alcohol and drug counselor. I'm assuming they're going to change that one day because alcohol is considered a drug. Okay, but now we know better, and it would be a moral failing to refer to addiction as a moral failing. There has been plenty of science and studies done to show that this is not a moral failing. My point in this presentation is to make you understand it is not a choice, it is a disease. And to think of it as a choice would be a moral failing. No one is going to choose to do something that's going to ruin their lives. So let's break it down, choice versus disease. Choice is the act of selecting or making a decision when faced with two or more possibilities. That's the Webster's definition, okay? So if you go to dinner tonight, not that that's done as much now with COVID, but back in the old days when we would go out to dinner, a choice would be, would you like soup or salad? Okay? Now, take choice into addiction. Do you want to live or die? Most people are going to say live. So that choice is going to be affected by a disease, which is a harmful deviation from the normal structure or functional state of an organism. So cancer, diabetes, HIV, polio, those are diseases, common known diseases. And addiction is in there too. Then there's the good versus evil, right? So the choice, usually we have the ability to make the choice that is best for us. We could choose, say, our careers. We live in a country where we're probably able to choose our partners. We can usually choose where we live. These are all choices that we have the ability to make for ourselves. No one else is influencing that choice. We get to make that choice. Disease is a little different. In disease, you don't really have to choose the disease, correct? You don't choose to have cancer or diabetes or HIV or polio or any of those things. However, there's some behaviors that may lead to the development of that disease, but the disease itself is not a choice. Okay, so let's think of some of those behaviors. Some examples would be smoking. A lot of people will start smoking in their teen years, kind of like out of peer pressure or whatever it might be, but they don't pick up that cigarette going, yep, I choose lung cancer. A high-fat diet. I choose heart disease every time I order that bacon cheeseburger. Unsafe sex. Well, I choose to catch a sexually transmitted infection. Those aren't the choices that are made. It's some of the behaviors that will then lead to the disease. So now let's talk about addiction. The definition of addiction. A compulsive, chronic, physiological, or psychological need for habit-forming substance, behavior, or activity having harmful physical, psychological, or social effects, typically causing well-defined symptoms such as anxiety, irritability, tremors, or nausea upon withdrawal or abstinence, the state of being addicted. All right, so that's a lot of words, but that's the definition. And that's kind of the face I make whenever I read that definition and I actually know about addiction. So we're going to break it down a little bit for you. I'm going to take a quick water break. Compulsive. We all know what compulsive means. It's an irresistible urge. Pretty self-explanatory. That urge that you just cannot resist to use that substance. Kind of the same, I can compare it to, your urge to eat when you're hungry, right? It's compulsive. When you're hungry, you want to get something to eat. It's constant, it's compulsive. It's not going to stop. Those hunger pains or feelings are not going to stop until you give it some food. Chronic. It's a chronic disease. Addiction is chronic. It is something that addicts will deal with their entire lives. It doesn't just go away. Okay. It's a lifetime situation for them. Physiological. So that's the physical part of it. The the parts of the addiction that affect your health. And despite those things happening, you continue to use. So the alcoholic who has been told that he has liver damage and continues to drink, that's the physical harm that is that the substance is causing his body. However, that irresistible urge, that compulsiveness, he still can't stop using it. The mental part of it, okay, the psychological, the mental, and we'll get into this a little bit as we go through the program, the habit forming, the mental part of it, the self-medicating portion of it. People will often use to kind of to take care of their mental illnesses. There's also some substances such as methamphetamines, as well as alcohol, that will affect the brain and will affect the brain chemistry. All drugs will affect the brain chemistry, but they will do it on a more permanent basis. Alcohol dementia is one thing related to alcohol, and then methamphetamines, the substance is so strong that it literally changes the wiring in the brain, and the brain can't recover from it. Okay, so then also in the definition it says, it talks about drugs. So like I said, drugs are, you name it, heroin, cocaine, you know, the popular ones, marijuana, but nicotine, caffeine, alcohol, those are all drugs. Recent studies, FYI, which I found was very interesting, nicotine has the same effects on the same parts of the brain as heroin. That's why people who are smokers, that's why it is so hard for them to quit smoking. As a former smoker, I can attest to that. I've never done heroin, but quitting smoking is one of the hardest things ever. Also, I probably should have said this before, you know, I'm not going to get into a lot of what makes someone to diagnose someone as having a substance abuse disorder. When I put alcohol in here, and if you're someone that has a glass of wine with dinner a few times a week, I don't want you to panic. There's a good chance you don't have a problem. And as we talk more and you have questions about that, if you have any further questions about that, you can ask me either after or in private. But please don't think just because I had coffee this morning, I don't know that, you know, it's not affecting my life in a negative way, so I don't think it's an addiction issue for me. There are other things we can be addicted to as well. Behaviors: shopping, gambling, sex, food, internet. Those are some of the more popular behavior addictions that have come about. Often, a lot of times, these behaviors will replace substances. So someone that quits using substances may then become addicted to shopping or food or on the internet all the time. One replaces the other. But these behaviors, the behavior addictions, can be just as damaging. When we talk about withdrawal, this is basically going to depend on the substance: anxiety, irritability, tremors, nausea, coma, and death. There are two substances that you can die from withdrawal from. Those would be alcohol and benzodiazepines. Benzodiazepines being like Xanax, Klonopin, those kind of medications. We will often tell people that are looking for bed and residential treatment that have an addiction to alcohol to not withdraw on their own, to either get somewhere where they can detox for a few days, or unfortunately to keep drinking for a few days until we can get them to bed. A lot of people think you can die from a heroin overdose. You cannot. You will feel like you're going to die, but you will not die from a heroin overdose, or not heroin withdrawal. You'll totally die from a heroin overdose, from heroin withdrawal. Okay, so I hope that broke it down a little bit. I cannot see the Q&A, but feel free to put those questions in there and we will come back and answer anything if I'm going too fast or I leave something out.
So far, Tracey, we're okay.
Okay, thank you, Sue. All right, so here's some facts just for the state of Illinois. Over 5,500 deaths among Illinois residents. Of those 5,500 deaths among Illinois residents each year, over 5% of all the deaths are directly or indirectly related to the use of alcohol or other drugs. What does that mean? That means people that car accidents from being under the influence, falls, things like that. So they're not necessarily overdosing on that substance, but there's other things that are happening due to the use of that substance. So 9,000 to 10,000 Illinois residents die each year from accidental injuries. About 40% of those deaths are related to the use of alcohol. Each year, about 18,000 Illinois residents die from conditions that are related to the use of tobacco products. These tobacco-related deaths account for about 17% of the annual total deaths among Illinois residents. Statewide economic costs associated with alcohol, other drug, and tobacco-related mortality is in excess of $3.5 billion. What I thought was really interesting about this little snippet, this information on the slide, is the two middle ones, the use of alcohol and the use of tobacco, which are the two legal. Well, marijuana is legal too, but those two have been legal the longest, the most easily accessible, somewhat socially acceptable. Alcohol still is, tobacco used to be, but those are the two causing the most damage, and you can pretty much walk into any store and buy both of those, if not at least one of them. Another thing, I don't have a slide on it, but I got this in an email the other day and I wanted to share with you. This came from the DuPage County Coroner in regards to overdose deaths, opioid overdose deaths in particular. You've all heard of the opioid epidemic. So prior to the COVID lockdown, there were 17 overdoses. After the lockdown, 53 overdoses. Why? We'll talk about that as we go further, but it's that lack of access to certain resources, right? 12-step meetings got shut down, outpatient counseling sessions weren't happening, things like that. We're also next going to talk a little bit about demographics, and so I wanted to share with you this as well. 78% of those overdoses were Caucasians, and 78% of them were, wait, no, I said that wrong, 76% of them were male. So a high percentage of DuPage residents overdosing on heroin are white males. Sneak another sip of water. So the next bunch of statistics are really going to be about national statistics. 1 in 8 individuals nationally reports suffering from a substance use disorder. 8.5 million suffer from both substance use disorder and mental health disorder, co-occurring disorders. Mental health and substance abuse go together like peas and carrots. Training to be a substance abuse counselor requires an extensive mental health training as well, because as I say, they go together. And we'll talk some more about that as we go along too. It'll come up again about that kind of self-medication. If you're experiencing a mental health disorder and you don't have access to those resources, you don't have access to medication, therapeutic interventions, whatever it might be, you're going to use substances to deal with that mental health disorder. Or maybe in your environment, in your community, people don't ask for help. You don't deal with that. Mental illness is, that's just nonsense. Just, you know, suck it up, deal with it. Let me go to this substance. And if you think about it, it's very common. Like, oh, I had a really bad day. I think I'm going to just go home and have a glass of wine. It's a natural coping skill that people will use. 9.4% are men and 5.2% are women. Now, I have this little down here that says statistic disclaimer. This might pop up on a couple more screens. I never trust these statistics, and here's why. They send out a poll to people and say, tell me if you have a substance use disorder, tell me if you have a mental health disorder, tell me how often you're using, you know, et cetera, et cetera. A lot of people are not going to answer that honestly, whether it's in person or on a piece of paper. I totally realized I just spelled disclaimer wrong too. I apologize. 1, there is a fear of them being judged. 2, they may not realize they have a substance use disorder. And 3, there's a fear in some communities of being penalized for that, of going to jail for that. If you remember the 80s, the Just Say No campaign also criminalized the use of substances. So a lot of people were sent to jail for basically having a disease. They were sent to prison if they were caught in possession of drugs, which they were using to treat their disease. Now, they weren't treating it right with the drugs, but still it was a disease and people were sent to prison for that. So whenever you see that statistic disclaimer, just keep that in mind. This is not something most people are going to answer really honestly about. Ethnicity, interestingly enough, the highest percentage is American Indians and Alaska Natives. Why, you may ask? I will tell you why. On Indian reservations, they are typically very poor, very low income. There is a lack of health care and a lack of mental health care. And they also start very young because they're do some research on American Indian reservations. You'll see they're really high addiction rates. There's not a lot there for the people living on that reservation. And so that is why those rates come in pretty high. Next is white, African American, and Hispanic, right in there together. Surprisingly enough, Asian is not surprisingly enough, I've known this for a while, but Asian, very, very low percentage of Asian people suffer from any substance use disorders. And again, this is here in America too. So I'm not sure what the rates are in China. Financial, 17% of people that report a substance use disorder are unemployed and 9% are employed. Again, there's my disclaimer. People aren't always going to answer honestly, but it just goes to show that, you know, that it's not that huge of a difference. But it definitely shows that there's a big portion of people that have jobs. They are functioning with their substance use disorder. All right, let's talk about the brain now. We're done with the stats. So now we're going to get into a little science, okay? So we all know our brain is the most complex organ in our body. It controls everything. It controls me speaking right now. It controls me wringing my fingers right now. It's controlling my breathing. It's controlling my feet on the floor right now. It's controlling my eye contact with this program. It's controlling everything. It regulates all those basic functions. Without the brain, we wouldn't be able to breathe. I wouldn't be able to sit in this chair the right way. I wouldn't be able to speak. I wouldn't be able to see. The brain is taking care of all that. Everything you think, you feel, and basically who you are starts at the brain. So that's where the disease part comes in, because the drugs affect the brain. And if the brain is in control of everything and the drugs come in and take over the brain, guess who's in control now? All right, so here we go. This cute little picture kind of shows, and anyone out here that has more knowledge in science, I apologize for my basic knowledge in trying to explain this, but this is how the brain cells communicate. The neurons send messages to other neurons via these neurotransmitters, okay? The neurons in different parts of the brain, spinal cord, and bodies affect different parts of our body's functioning. So some parts are controlling the physical, some are controlling the mental, the feelings, everything has its own little job. And then once a message is received, that signal is kind of limited or shut off. So that signal is sent for me to talk in this program, and once I'm done with this, that will shut off. That's kind of like the easiest way for me to describe it. So, but now let's talk about our brain being on drugs. This is your brain on drugs. Just kidding. Like we're not gonna focus on that because that was a bad message, but I still wanted to share it. So the drugs cause those neurotransmitters to send abnormal messages, and those messages usually include larger amounts of dopamine and serotonin. So dopamine and serotonin are the happy neurotransmitters. Those are the things that make us feel good. When we eat a meal that we enjoy, when we see a family member we haven't seen in a while, when we have sex, these type of neurotransmitters are released and they flood the brain and they make us feel good and happy. Okay, so think of something that brings you joy and that kind of feeling. That's your dopamine and serotonin moving on up in the world. I think next is okay, so this is a quick little video I recorded that talks a little bit more about how what the drugs do to the brain. This is something that was taught to me many moons ago by one of my professors. So it kind of helps understand a little bit, and then I'm going to talk some more about it. So let's hope technology is in my favor today. There I am.
Tracy, we can't hear it on our end.
Okay, hold on.
It's like completely muted.
Okay, so here's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna play it and just talk over it as to what I'm doing there, if that'll work.
Sounds good.
All right, so let me do this. Give me 1 second. I want to turn the volume down here. See, this is why Sue is here. This is why she's here. Okay. All right, so this line I'm pointing to, I'll tell you what I've said so far. This line here, this represents your brain. All right. This represents your brain when it's happy, when things are good and you have normal levels of serotonin and dopamine and things are just kind of going okay. This is your brain just living its best life. No added stress, no added joy, no added anything. It's just there, okay? Then we add drugs to it. That little dot there, that's me putting drugs into your brain, okay? Then we take those drugs and our serotonin spikes, okay? It goes way, way up there. So here's what we thought was normal happy, and then this happens and it goes way up there, and now we're super, super happy. That's what drugs will initially do to your brain. Okay, so I'm still talking. Okay, so I probably should have kept the video playing. I apologize. So yeah, that's your brain on drugs, way up there where I'm pointing. Then what happens is we stop using, the drug wears off, we come down, not to where we were, we go even lower. Our serotonin levels are now dropping because our brain is trying to understand the chemistry of what is going on. It's trying to understand why at that line it felt good, and then it felt really, really good up there, okay? So let's try and use again, because that's probably gonna help us feel better. We didn't quite get that best feeling that we had before. You guys have heard the phrase chasing the dragon, going after that high. A lot of people are doing that, and they're never gonna get there. That's never gonna happen for them. That first high, especially with a more severe drug like heroin, you're never going to get that again. All right, so all right, I got to stop using again. You come down, serotonin level still dipping between the normal. All right, let's try it again. Nope, that didn't work. Okay, let's go back. Now someone in addiction is sincerely, or I don't know why I said sincerely, is really just using to feel what is their new normal. Okay, so a lot of people will, especially with heroin withdrawal, alcohol withdrawal, very, very severe. And so people are down way below in that serotonin level. So they keep using just to keep that normal, to be at that line there that represents everything's okay in their brain with their serotonin and dopamine levels. Most alcoholics and definitely most heroin addicts are not even getting high anymore. They're just using to feel better. So before we go into this, so that's kind of what happens. The brain, the drugs completely change the brain chemistry. Your brain prior to using and using now is completely different. We also have found that it is some studies have shown that people from I'm sorry, I'm struggling with my words here. The age they first use is the age they kind of get stuck at. So if you first use at the age of say 22, you're not going to progress past that age until, this is mentally, until you stop using it. Kind of like freezes your brain in that area. Okay, so now what? So now we've talked about addiction. We know what it's all about. Now what? Let's talk about a cure. Nope, there's no cure. There's no cure for addiction. For myself, like I said, I'm a non-smoker. I can speak to that. You know, there are still times where I'm like, you know, I don't, because of the years I have under my belt of not smoking, but there's really never, there's no cure for it. And the more severe the drug, the harder it is. It's chronic and it's progressive. By progressive, I mean, most alcoholics don't start out as alcoholics the first day they have a drink. Think back in your life. For most of us in high school, we decided we would try alcohol because that's what everybody was doing, right? For some of us, we didn't develop anything after that, but for some of us, progressively, it got worse. Some people continue to drink, and there's a progression in that drug use. Again, no cure. Treatment. So there's different kinds of treatments that we can talk about for someone that is suffering from addiction. Really important to remember, especially if you have someone maybe that you're concerned about. No one is going to get help unless they want help. You can't make someone get help if they don't want help. I don't know how many of you have seen the show Intervention on A&E. Don't get me wrong, I like watching the show. It's nonsense. Interventions don't work. You can't gang up on someone and tell them all the things they've done wrong and expect them to go get help when that substance is the thing that's making them feel better. They're going to walk out of the room and go find their substance so they feel better because you just made them feel bad. So some of the treatment options out there are 12-step programs, AA, Alcoholics Anonymous, NA, Narcotics Anonymous. Then it even goes into HA, Heroin Anonymous, CA, Cocaine Anonymous. See where I'm going? Keep going, keep going. Plenty of 12-step programs out there. There are programs for pretty much any time of day, any day of the week. There's a meeting going on somewhere. With coronavirus, a lot of those meetings did go virtual. These higher overdose rates I was talking about, there was an increased use in substances and overdoses and accidents and things since coronavirus because people may not have had access to go to an online meeting and their meetings were canceled. So 12-step meetings are one way. Some people do not like 12-step meetings at all. Some people claim that that is what has saved them and kept them sober over the years. There's also medications. So I want to talk a few minutes about the different medications. For alcohol, there's antabuse, which is something that it's like a pill you would take before you went out, because if you drink, you're going to get violently ill. There's also a monthly shot called Vivitrol, kind of does the same thing. Also takes away I'm sorry, it does not make you throw up. Vivitrol kind of like just takes it away. It turns off one of those neurotransmitters in the brain. And then with heroin, a couple of the most popular medications are, the first one is Suboxone, which is not new, but relatively new. Suboxone is it's a translingual film. I don't know if I pronounced that right, that a user will place on their tongue and it dissolves. And it has a certain amount of the medication in there. Same thing to turn off those receptors. Also keeps the withdrawal symptoms away. With heroin, the biggest thing is the dope sickness. People don't want to be sick. I mean, who wants to be sick? So heroin takes that away. But things like Suboxone and methadone, which I'm going to talk about, keep the sickness away, and then also reduce the cravings. With Suboxone as well as methadone, the goal is to reduce the dosage. So, you'll start here at 45, down to 40, down to 35 to slowly kind of wean yourself off. Methadone has been around a long time. Methadone has gotten a bad rap. Methadone is actually an amazing substance for people addicted to heroin, as long as it is distributed properly. There are a lot of methadone clinics that are not, they're just not good people. But as long as it's accompanied by random drug testing, counseling, things like that, methadone can work. When I was working at the west side of Chicago, I had a client who was a heroin addict for many, many years, did sufficient prison time for crimes we won't discuss here, decided to get clean. He has been clean for 20 years and is still on 5 milligrams of methadone a day, just to kind of keep those cravings away. So like I said, methadone is not, a lot of people think that's just a replacement. It's not. People are safer using methadone than they are buying drugs on the street, which could be laced with other things, which can put their lives in danger going into neighborhoods that maybe aren't very safe. People, that have weapons, all those things are really bad versus going into a secure clinic to get their medication. Outpatient treatment, there's different levels of outpatient. There's intensive outpatient, IOP, or regular outpatient, OP. It really just depends on how many hours a week. And that's usually done in a group setting with people kind of at the same level of recovery as you, as well as some individual counseling. Then there's inpatient treatment and detox. Rarely are those in the same place. A lot of agencies will have someone go somewhere first to detox and then they come into their bed. Like I said, a detox requires, especially for things like alcohol and benzos, a medical intervention. Also for heroin, to make it easier for the person to detox. Big problem that people make is they go to detox, they feel better and they're like, all right, I got this, and they don't go to treatment and they don't learn new coping skills to help them deal with the stressors that life's going to present to them. So yeah, they're clean for that moment. It doesn't last very long. Going back to overdoses, with heroin overdoses, most heroin overdoses, which again relates to this report from the coroner, so that video I showed you with the spike. So with heroin, when you use heroin the first time, your tolerance spikes. It goes way up. So you have a good tolerance for heroin. When you stop using heroin, your tolerance immediately plummets. So kind of like picture that little graph I had, but using it for tolerance. It goes way down immediately. So overdoses usually come from people that have been clean for some amount of time, and then they use again. And because they used to use this amount before, they use that same amount, and that causes the overdose. That's where a lot of these are coming from. People did not have access to treatment when COVID came along. AA meetings, all that stuff was out the window, and so they decided to self-medicate, and overdoses happened. Overdoses also happen a lot with things like heroin, with the drug being laced with things that are much more dangerous, such as fentanyl and whatnot. So inpatient treatment usually lasts anywhere from 21 to 30 days, really depends on someone's insurance. Then there is aftercare, which I didn't include in this slide, and I just realized that was a mistake, but that would be like going to like a halfway house for a while, that kind of just help people get back in the swing of things, and to be safe and find work, stay clean, all those types of things. Personally, inpatient treatment should be longer than 21 to 30 days. If it took you 8 years to build up an addiction to something, why do we think that in 30 days we can make that go away? Just a little personal. I frozen? I think my computer froze. Oh no. Oh, all done. There we go. Give me 1 second here, everyone. Go back. Sorry about this. All right. All right, I don't know what I did there, but we're here now. Okay, so now let's talk about what can we do to hopefully, I don't know what's happening. There we go. Okay. Prevention. Prevention is our best tool when it comes to addiction. So there's long been this argument of nature versus nurture. Okay. So nature is genetics, a history of substance use, a history of mental illness. So if you come from a family that has a higher rate of addiction or higher rate of mental illness, some studies show that there's a really good chance that you're going to have the same problems. Okay. Then there's the nurture studies, your environment, parents, caregivers, friends, and it being acceptable behavior. So the child that grows up with two parents that are addicted to a substance, or let's keep it real simple, they grow up with two parents that smoke cigarettes, okay? And I can use myself as this, right? Mom and dad, chain smokers. Everybody in the family smokers. Nobody didn't smoke. I don't remember anybody that didn't smoke. It was an acceptable behavior. It's what you did. Like that's just what you did. So there's this nature and nurture, okay? And these are the two factors that really go into determining why someone becomes addicted to a substance. Now, it doesn't mean it's always the case, but it is something, studies are showing it. So what can you do as far as prevention? Well, if you know that there's a history of substance use in your family, maybe take a look at that. Maybe talk to your children about that. Have those conversations, hoping that it doesn't pass down. If there's a history of mental illness, look for signs of that, so that your family members are not possibly self-medicating if symptoms show up. The nurture part of it, make sure that we're nurturing good behavior, that we're not pretending that this is acceptable behavior to say drink too much every night, or to smoke marijuana with our friends, or whatever it might be. So these are the two big parts of it. I've seen it in my family, nature versus nurture. I've seen it in other areas, but they both play a role in whether or not someone is going to pick up a substance and become addicted to that substance. So there's a lot of different factors that also go into why someone would become a substance user and develop a substance abuse disorder. Trauma is one of the big ones. People that have experienced some kind of trauma, it's back to that self-medication. It is a way to deal with it. It's a way to kind of forget about that trauma, kind of shut that down for a minute. We see a high prevalence of drug use and drug abuse in people coming home from Afghanistan and places of war, suffering from PTSD. Mental illness, like I said before, it's something that people usually have a mental illness if they have a substance use disorder, and there's this co-occurring, and it's a way to self-medicate it and to deal with it. Self-medication, like I just talked about. Lack of resources. So we talked about that with like the American Indians on the reservations. There's no resources there. And there's a lot of shame in it too, to admit that you have a problem. So if you live in an area where you're being told that you are weak-willed and if you use and you can't handle your business, and then even if you try to turn away from your family and say, well, I still need help, but there's no resources there to do that. You know, the state of Illinois suffered a big blow many years ago. A lot of mental health facilities were shut down, and the funding just isn't there for them. So those are some factors. And also those enablers in your family or your friends, those people that kind of don't want to deal with this, don't want to admit that you might have a problem, and continue to assist you, so to speak, and enable your use. So the barriers to care, just to review those a little bit more, there's the stigma of going to get help. You don't ask for help, even if it is a problem. So like the African American culture, you don't ask for help. That's not something that is done. It doesn't show that you're a strong African American man if you have to go to help for your mental illness. Like I said, the lack of services, the money that it costs for the services, right? So we have in inpatient care, usually there are, say, 20 beds. 5 of those beds are for Medicaid, which means they're going to get government payment for those individuals. And once those 5 Medicaid beds fill up, if you don't have your own insurance or you don't have Medicaid, you're just going on a really, really long list, unless you have money or really good insurance. Family responsibility. A lot of family members, a lot of people don't want to go into treatment because they have a family to take care of. Men will seek treatment far more often than women because women have the children to worry about in the house to take care of and the groceries and things like that. Or they're a single mom. There's no dad to say, hey, I need you to watch the kids for a few weeks while I go to treatment. There's a fear. Someone that's been using a substance for a really long time to feel okay is afraid that if they use, they're not going to feel okay anymore, that line is going to drop. This is what's been working. I'm not going to change it. The illness, like I said, the going through the withdrawal, having to face the illnesses that might have been now brought on by my substance use. So I can ignore the fact that I may have liver disease as long as I keep drinking. I'm just going to pretend it's not there. But if I get sober, I'm going to have to deal with that. A lack of healthy coping skills. In treatment, a lot of things we teach is how to cope with what's about to happen in your life. Everyone is going to experience things that are going to be stressful. There's life stressors all around us all the time. People are not taught, back to that nature versus nurture thing, if they're not taught healthy coping skills early on in life, they're not going to be able to use them going forward. And then they found this substance that is a great coping skill in their opinion. As well as the support of family members. You know, hey, I'm thinking about going to treatment. Who's going to be there to support that family member? Some people are going to be like, nope, I don't want nothing to do with this, or that's crazy. I don't want to admit to people that I have a drug addict for a sister or whatever it might be. So that's another barrier to care. So here's a few places you can go for help. I think we're at the end here, so we'll see if there's any questions here in a couple of minutes. SAMHSA.gov. Has a treatment locator in there. If someone was looking to get treatment, you put in your zip code and it gives you different options for your area. There's also the Illinois Helpline, same thing, can help someone find treatment. An AA meeting is as simple as going to aa.org. Al-Anon is not something I talked about, I don't think, but Al-Anon is for family members of addicts. So even as a substance abuse counselor, I would attend Al-Anon meetings just to help me kind of deal with what I was hearing and what was happening as I'm trying to help clients, and they're still getting high. So Al-Anon is a support for family members. I didn't, put my information on there, but you guys should know how to get a hold of me. As I said, I am a CADC. Any conversations I have with any patrons are completely confidential. There's no notes, nothing. It's just me and you, and that's it. I think I am at the end. These are the resources where I got some information from. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And were there any questions?
So no questions right now, but if we can always give it a couple of minutes if anybody wants to go ahead and if they've got something to type in. Okay, so we have friends that continue to relapse after 9 months, then 12 months, then 18 months. I know we can't force them to stop, but how do we help them realize or stay strong?
Okay, so the relapse, first of all, that's normal. It takes people a long, long time, and some people never find that recovery. So the best thing I can tell you to do, that goes back to that enabling. If you have a friend or a family member that's continuing to relapse and use, you have to remove yourself from it. You have to let them know that this behavior is not acceptable to you. And if they're going to continue with that behavior, you're not going to be a part of their life. However, you will be there to support them if they want to pursue a sober life, but you're not going to continue to support them killing themselves. It's very harsh, but it's very true. And it's one of the hardest parts about addiction is to realize that you cannot change people's minds, that you just have to let them be. And it's really, really tough. But as far as relapsing, I definitely want you to understand that that is a normal thing. People relapse all the time.
All right, anyone else have any questions? There's another one came through, hold on. My sister took someone in and part of the deal was if you drink, you are out. Then they relapse. And do you kick them out? They have no place to go. It's a trap. Okay.
I am in no way ever going to tell someone to kick someone out, but I'm going to explain it this way. You have asked you've let this person come stay with you. And the deal was if you drink, you're out of here. And then they relapse. They have no place to go. And you feel bad and you let them stay there and you say, I'm sorry, but yes, you can stay here. Why would that person stop drinking? There's no consequences. That person continues to live in this place that they've been living. Nothing has changed in their life. There's a term that's used a lot in addiction called rock bottom. I hate that term, by the way, only because to me, some people's rock bottom is death. So we don't want anyone ever to hit their rock bottom. However, why would someone change a behavior if there's no consequences, right? So if I were to stop exercising and stop eating right, I know the consequences. I'm going to gain weight and I'm going to, weigh 300 pounds or something like that. This person has no consequences. If they continue to drink and they relapse, there's no consequences. They're not left out. They're not kicked out of the house. It's a tough road. It's a tough thing to do, but that's the best way I can describe it is if there's no consequences, why in the hell would I change my behavior? I'm using and I got a place to live. Life is good. That was kind of like the harsh answer, but.
So we have another question. A loved one is sober right now. She is going through a very stressful time. How can I help her stay sober during this difficult time?
So my first question would be, are they in a 12-step group? If they are, to maintain that contact with that 12-step group. If they are not interested in 12-step, try to identify what support systems this individual has. Just because of COVID doesn't mean that we are not still helping people. I meet with people myself virtually, probably more than I did in person at this point. So just making sure that those support systems are there. This is a trying time for a lot of people and can test things like sobriety. So I think a simple question of, how are you? Is there anything you need? What can I do? Are going to be the real simple questions you can ask that she can answer, and feel free to send them my way as well. No one, again, completely confidential, and you don't have to be an Elmhurst patron to speak to me.
The person who asked the question responded, she is in AA virtually and in person when possible. Thank you.
Okay, good, perfect. Tell her to stick with that. Hopefully she has a sponsor, there's sponsorship involved. And yeah, maybe just asking her, like, hey, like I said, just asking her, how's it going? That kind of stuff.
Back to the person who had asked about the person living in the house and if they were relapsing. And so they responded, great answer. And one follow-up, if we kick someone out, is there really a place to go? Where do we tell them to go if they say, I have no place to go?
So this is where you would go to that samhsa.gov website or that Illinois helpline. Here's the tricky part though. Most places are not going to have, and this is assuming they want to go somewhere for help. Most places aren't going to have a bed available immediately. That's just the sad place of our, how our society works. So they're not going to have an instant place to go, and that's a struggle with people with addiction, because once someone says, hey, I want to get help, you kind of like want to immediately put them in bubble wrap and take them to treatment. That would be the ideal situation. Doesn't always work that way.
I'm sorry to interrupt. They just shared again that they live in California.
Okay, all right. So samhsa.gov is for the whole country. So that's the good news. So you can definitely go to that website and find treatment there. In the meantime, though, most places, if they have residential treatment and they can't get in if there's no bed, they put them in an outpatient program to at least get some support in the meantime. So are there places to go? Yes. Are those places immediately available? Usually not. That's when you have to decide, as this person is living with you, whether you're going to allow them to stay there until that bed's available, hoping they don't change their mind. You know, there's so many factors that come in on that, but samhsa.gov is definitely the place to go. And also you can reach out to me and email me if you'd like, and I can research some places depending on where it's at in California.
I have another question. How, the question you were just answering, thank you. How would you recommend suggesting to a user that they need to confront their psychological triggers?
You would not do that. You would let their counselor or therapist do that. That's kind of the honest answer on that. You know, people are gonna, it's just human nature, we're gonna be offended by that if someone comes at us and says, hey, you should deal with, let a counselor or trained professional do that.
Nothing right now. Waiting to see if maybe there was a follow-up.
I want to encourage everyone to reach out to me if there's something maybe you don't want to ask in this forum or something you think of afterwards. Please, please, please send me an email. Tracey, it's Tracey .Orick, O-R-I-C-K, at elm.lib.org. That's also available on the website, so don't worry. You can go onto our website and find it, because sometimes this can be something that questions come up later, questions you might not want to ask right now. Feel free to reach out to me.
Tracey, I'm going to go ahead and type that into the chat, and so okay. Click it. Can you, I got Tracey dot, remind me your last name?
Orick, O-R-I-C-K.
O-R-I-C-K.
And you know the rest.
Okay.
Yep.
All right, so if you do go into that chat feature, everyone, you can see Tracey's email is right there. So you can highlight and copy it if you'd like to, and save it somewhere else or write it down if you'd like to. And are there any other questions? We do have a couple more minutes. Be happy to answer any other questions.
Oh, and happy recovery month. September is recovery month. So anyone that you know that is in recovery, be sure to acknowledge that this month and tell them happy recovery month.
I have a question for you, Tracey.
Sure, Sue.
Do you find that people who are in recovery like to speak about their recovery? Like
Yes.
if you knew somebody who was a recovering addict, to wish them happy recovery month, that would be something that would be appropriate?
I would think so. Yeah. You know, a lot of times the AA meetings we were talking about, they have different types of meetings. One of them are speaker meetings, which are usually open to anyone. And a lot of those speakers are people that are in recovery, and they're talking about their recovery. I mean, to achieve recovery is huge. You know, I'm not saying that survivor cancer shouldn't be celebrated or people beating diabetes shouldn't be celebrated, but we are not celebrated in the recovery world. Yeah, absolutely. I don't think, you know, as long as there's someone that has told you that they've had an addiction problem, they've gone to treatment, I don't see why they would be upset by that.
Sure, absolutely. Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you so much for coming.
Yes, thank you.
We won't cut out the meeting right away. I will leave the chat up for a little bit again if you want to grab Tracey's email. And like she said, you are welcome to contact her privately if this forum is not a correct or appropriate place to ask your questions. Thanks everyone for coming, and thank you, Tracey. It was very interesting.
Thank you. Glad everyone enjoyed it. Enjoy the rest of your weekend. Stay safe, everyone.